Greetings and welcome to the Saroth the Mage podcast. Today I've got my favourite guest, Theophilos Peleus, the Logos of Ophiel, and tonight we're going to be talking about Renaissance magic and really how someone could get a start in this praxis. So, could you give us an introduction into the world of Renaissance magic, please, Theophilos?
Yes, very much. You've already started the main book I'm going to be talking about in this, and that was the Elizabethan world picture. And you just said you got into the chain of being, right?
Yep, it's the third chapter.
Yes. So you're getting ready to go into the bulk of the book that sort of outlines this. The universe wasn't seen as a way we project it, but it was seen the world and the universe together. They were alive. They had entities, they had creatures, there was order, and everything had its place. Even if there was chaos, everything sort of had its place. You've read enough Shakespeare to know that,
Oh,
especially when you read the tragedy or when you've read Milton, right?
yeah, I did Milton also, Paradise Lost. Yep, for sure.
Yes, yeah. So you saw the chaos in there. Like if you were a king, you were just meant to be king in your fate. Or if you were meant to be a peasant, you were meant to be a peasant. And it was unfair, and the whole thing was the one thing I really like about Renaissance magic is it sort of helps you accept your place in the world. And if you were a peasant, it wasn't perfect, but you were okay with it. And it was the same thing with the heavens. If there was an angel, that's awesome. There's an angel there, it had its place. There was a level of obedience in this magic, to the universe. And
Yes.
that's really important to note. And we have trouble with this today because of how much we've progressed, and we feel like we have to control our lives to some extent. But that's the gist of it: is you need to be close with God. Religion is a big part of this. Like you have as I like to say, the macro religion or the exoteric. Then you have the esoteric, which would be the grimoires. But the macro religion, for those who are familiar with the last interview that we did, you have the micro religion, which is like the grimoires and or you could say the esoteric view of the exoteric. Exoteric being like the macro religion. So the macro religion fed boundaries to the esoteric or the personal practices. So there was a level of obedience, acceptance, but also freedom at the same time. And knowing your place just kind of set you free. Being close with God set you free. Knowing how the universe functioned set you free. And if that makes any sense.
Indeed, it does. Yeah. Social mobility wasn't a big thing back then.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Back then, like today, people just say, "What's your sun sign?" or they say, "What's your sign?" But back then, the people they went far deeper than that. It wasn't just "What's your sign?" Oh well, where's your Mercury at? Where's your Venus? People knew their natal charts. Most people did because they believed that God dictated to stars that the universe was in complete order. Even if something seemed out of tune, it really wasn't. It was sort of there for a reason.
Yeah, it comes across that the idea of order was very important to the Elizabethans.
Oh yeah, anywhere from 1200 to 1700. I mean, it was a vital role, and it doesn't mean that they were slaves to astrology. That was far from the case. Actually, astrology was more or less a tool to sort of not just see what's going on, like like today we have astrology, as Liana, one of the people, termed it. People who actually live day by day, getting anxious over the astrology. It wasn't necessarily like that. Although astrology was a very big part for these people, they didn't have astrology. Astrology just sort of laid out the fundamentals of the world. You know, they didn't say, "Oh, well, I have this doctor's appointment. I got to wait till this hour to go there." It had nothing to do with that. I mean, although for especially Renaissance magicians, that was important. Anton LaVey called this, and you'd be well aware of the term occultnik. So, like you said,
Yeah.
there's some stuff where you do need that timing, though. It's really important. But in other cases, it was kind of loose. So it wasn't like astrology, which is like the worship of astrology, you know?
Yeah, I get you.
Mm-hmm.
So, what books would you recommend for a budding well, should we call them Renaissance magicians? I mean, this is
Yeah.
people who are wanting to practice traditional magic now.
Yes. Actually, I would consider this a year and a half course, and I think you should add that in the title because this is important. Now, the first year and a half I find is actually kind of slow. Like I was always more into the philosophical side than like right around and I've always kind of dabbled in the grimoires beforehand. But once right around August of 2017 hit, it's been about a good year and a half. I've been studying this and practicing it, and it only enhanced my level of knowing philosophy and my practices. So once again, this is a year and a half course that I would recommend for those who want to get into classical Renaissance magic. Okay, so the first thing that you need to read daily, and I'm just going to come out with it, is the Bible. That is
The
so,
Bible.
yeah. It's really important to understanding this. Psalms 51, for example, quite common. Yeah, wash me with hyssop, make me as white as snow. One of the most famous lines out of that. You'll see it in the Key of Solomon. You'll find it everywhere, and not just
Yes,
the Psalms.
I've heard a lot of reference to hyssop soap. I think Nima and Magic talks about hyssop soap actually as well. So that's a modern magical use of it.
Yeah, and you also have the book of Abramelin too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you go through that book, especially through some of the medicines and some of the ingredients, and such as you write this psalm of bread, or you write not just a psalm, but you write this verse from Deuteronomy on a piece of bread, and it'll help heal you of sickness. So just knowing the Bible alone is the most important thing. You meditate on it. I mean, this is really the main thing because uh, with the interview coming up with me, you, and Taliesin, this is going
Yeah.
to be very big because I don't want to go too deep into it, but there's something called the chain of being, where first was created, and this chain of being actually goes back all the way to Plato, and then
Yeah.
Aristotle got a hold of it. Then it made its way to the Christian world, all the way to the popes. And
It was
imagine this.
Zeus first, wasn't it? It was Zeus that was said to have a chain of being.
Yes, very much so. And then it just sort of evolved into this chain of being, starting at the throne of God. And there are links in the chain, and each link represents, you could say, a different world. So at the top, you would have your angels, and especially the nine orders of angels, which is prevalent in Renaissance art. You've seen a couple of the posts where I have that, right?
Yeah, you just
With those nine
posted it on
orders.
your Facebook, sorry, your YouTube channel, Logos of
Hmm.
Ophiel. Yeah.
Yeah. So then you have the next chain, which is actually with the stars. And with the stars, this is interesting because then you have two models here. You have the Neoplatonic model presented by Marsilio Ficino. Then you have the just the uh, the nine orders of angels, without the world soul there. The Marsilio Ficino, he presented a Neoplatonic view and Renaissance magic, and he brought in the world soul into this. So the theology between these two get a little different, but for the sake of grimoire practice, you have the world soul in between man and angels, sometimes even in some philosophy, manifested on earth. But the world soul was an was an indivisible thing, right? For example, to make note of this, me, you, and the viewer listening to this are all separate souls, right?
Yep.
Okay, but when we think about this concept, and there's a reason why I'm saying this in regards to the books, but as it gets processed through the stars disperse this world soul in their own rays, and the moon is sort of that receptacle of manifestation, just by how the moon is angled and stuff like this. But it goes deeper into how it manifests on Earth. But once it goes beyond that, you have one soul to many souls, and that sort of animated life. It unites spiritual and physical. So that's the gist of it. So not just the Bible, but the another book. It's religious in nature, but it goes into things that the grimoires and the magicians who wrote these grimoires would have looked at the world and how they applied it and what they believed. And this book is called the Catechism of the Catholic Church. This has the apostolic teachings that go back thousands of years and hundreds of years, and it's an oral tradition, and this is what the magicians would have went by. So when we look at this idea of the oral magician through this oral tradition in Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and the Coptic Church, the oral tradition is equal to the scripture. See, like Protestants, they like to place scripture at the end of all things. But what tradition and oral teachings do from the early churches is these are from the apostles. These are from the lineages and stuff. So what happens is this helps you interpret based on tradition, that goes back from the beginnings. So the catechism has things written in it that a lot of these magicians at the time already knew. Such as
Yes. So it
this.
kind of.
Yeah, for example, there's this huge debate in grimoires that people go over. I'm sure you may have come across it. Like, what are angels? And then you have this long thread, right?
Mhm.
Well, St. Augustine says it perfectly and sort of ends this debate with grimoires. And this is how even magicians would have thought of it, that if we were to look for the nature, angels are spirits, but it's their office that makes them angels completely. So even with the fall, the fallen angels, they would be considered demons. They're still spirits, but they're demons at this point. So it's really an office. So it really goes into all of this that the magician should know. And then the third book is the one you're on now, is the Elizabethan world picture. And this kind of goes into that chain that and everything that we're talking about. It goes into this cosmic order and how it works. And it's so deep and so complex.
It is quite I wouldn't say a heavy book, but there's a lot of quotes from like Shakespeare and Spenser and Milton. So it's not a light read.
Yeah, you have to be familiar with the language. And I don't know about, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. But I really love how he points out this mindset, especially from Shakespeare and Milton, about the theology, how people really viewed this theology and magic together. Like, wasn't it Milton? Yeah, it was Milton who said that there are millions of spirits among us.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I think that the hardest part, I think that at least the Elizabethan world picture, it brings things in a lighter perspective than what Agrippa does. And so does the Catechism. The Catechism and the Elizabethan World Picture are the first two I would read. Then I would go into the three books of occult philosophy because it expands heavily more into the Neoplatonic view and into Catholicism as well. So it's a pretty good mixture there. So you just knowing the cosmology of the Catechism and the Elizabethan World Picture, Agrippa will make a lot more sense beyond the old lingo and all of that.
Yeah, I have glanced through Agrippa, and I have found it a bit daunting because it is very complex. But one thing that was interesting about the English degree that I did, they remove all traces of esotericism from Shakespeare's work. They really don't focus on that at all. They talk about magic in Midsummer Night's Dream, which is probably the most overtly magical of his works, but they kind of treat it as like, oh, silly superstitions, and oh, even Shakespeare didn't believe this stuff. It was just for his audience who were, peasants. They really dismiss the magical worldview of the Elizabethans and present it as the beginning of the Age of Reason.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of sad to look at it that way, really. I think that we try to overcompensate and take control of our lives today. But that it's a little off topic, but I think it's necessary. While back then people were taught to give your problems to God, sort of relax and play it out through the day. Don't be anxious, or try not to be anxious at least. While today we feel like, I need to get control of who I am and my destiny and all this rather just than letting things happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
well, I found this aspect of it great for me because I'm a real overthinker. I tend to over intellectualize everything. And while I was doing
yes.
Thelema and Golden Dawn magic, it was really, it was like almost the Luciferian idea of there is no God, or that we are trying to become gods in this psychological process. But since I started with the classical magic Praxis, it has taken a lot of the burden off. I do feel more relaxed and just letting things happen in a more organic kind of way.
Oh, I agree. It's totally different in that regard. And when you go through these texts, the magician, his best power is purity and his knowledge of the cosmos through his own purity. And you'll find out when you go through it. So it's kind of relinquishing control to the universe, but in a more technical manner. Now,
Yes.
another book I think is important are primarily these three books from Plato, the Timaeus, the Critias, and the Symposium. Those are especially the Timaeus. That is pretty much the main philosophical bedrock of Renaissance magic. He goes into the world soul and all sorts of stuff in there. And even the philosophers, there's volumes of stuff just written on the Timaeus, and I think that those would be the core books that I would sort of focus around and read for a year and a half, just all every day, take the time to meditate on them and all of that in order to sort of understand the mechanics of how complex that this magical universe is, and how and I don't mean this in a demeaning way, but how one person so small, how the only way we can make an impact is if we know the system of something. As an example, if we're working at a job and we want to be boss one day, we have to get in, we have to work hard, we have to know the right people, get along with the right people, we have to know how the machines work in this factory, we have to get to know everybody, and we may have to kiss a little ass in order to get up there. But it's because we know the machine. So if we was to say fuck the machine, like some modernists today, then there's no way to advance because you're going against the rules. And one of the we let's call it laws, even though I don't mean law like you're going to jail. to strive in a place, you have to know the law. You have to know the boundaries. So individualism is fine, but to intentionally go against the grain for the sake of it and not really know the system, I mean, it's really, I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, the animals know their system outside of us. For example, a rabbit knows when to run from a hawk. When a rabbit sees a hawk, he doesn't sit there and say, "Bring it on." He's smarter than that, you know. Or um, when you see, we see it in human nature. When you have a 6'5" guy who's 350 pounds, just full of pure muscle, and like with me, I'm 5'5", 170. I know right away that that's not a guy I want to get angry. You know. So there are certain laws, there are certain rules in place that in magic, and to simply place individuality at the top of that, to trump the universe, to trump these other things, in a way, it's kind of selfish, narcissistic, and solipsistic. And the one thing is, we have to know the tools. We have to know everything. For example, in this magic, let's look at it like the workplace, right? You got to know the CEO. You got to know God. You know,
Yeah.
and if you know God, if you follow His rules, you're going to strive. And that's a scary thought for a lot of people. And I do plan on making a video about it, but because it is a deep, complex process, especially once we're fed postmodern philosophy. And it's kind of a travesty, because now you have people who spent like 8 years in a degree, and now they're working as a waiter or waitress, right after they get their degree. And
Oh,
that's the
absolutely.
travesty. Yeah, that's the travesty of the modern world. That's the travesty of the rise of individuality, in a sense. I'm not saying individuality is bad. I think it's important, but I think it's also important to know your place with your individuality, and to know when to exercise it in the right places, and to know the system that you're working under.
Yeah.
And that's what the system is about.
I think the move towards more classical forms of magic and grimoire magic are a reaction against the excesses of postmodernism and chaos magic, when it really was just not quite throw away the rules altogether, but it did get silly, when you were using superheroes as god forms, stuff like that. So
Well,
each
I
generation tends to react against its predecessor.
Well, I think it goes beyond that, really. I mean, I think it's more of even beyond magic. I mean, there's a rise of classical thought going around because of postmodern culture. I mean, this is at least my opinion. Is it's so empty in a lot of regards.
Yeah, well,
It's
look at modern art and how silly and the overtly
mm,
conceptual stuff. That's why I was talking about remodernism, this move
mhm,
towards more sort of honest art, getting
mhm,
spirituality back into art, and like the old-fashioned skills of painting and drawing. That's become
mhm.
important in art again. So I think it's a worldwide movement towards a more meaningful, spiritualized
Oh yeah.
society.
Because once you break something down to that, something is just strictly data on paper, or something is just something that a professor says, and it's sort of, it has no meaning. It's just sort of undisciplined data. I mean, where do you turn? Because when you try to exercise an emotion, you could be wrong. Or when you try to express an opinion, you have to make sure it's the right opinion. And that's the struggle in today's modern world. And it's so complex, and I'm oversimplifying it, but I mean, there's obvious issues, you know what I mean, that we're struggling with. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. There's actually a line in the first prayer in the Arbatel about, we're surrounded by our own opinions. So basically, surrender to God or the higher power, and that takes that burden away.
Yeah, and this is where meditation and stuff is really important too. The actual practice behind all of it. and and the lifestyle of it, because a lot of people treat things as tools. And I'm not saying everybody's a psychopath, but this is what psychopaths do. Psychopaths and sociopaths, they sort of see the world as their playground, and everybody's a tool. Everything is a tool. If you like, this person is knows somebody who can get you a good job, and and you go in and you just approach that person, because not because you necessarily like them, because they're a tool to help you get that job. Or you know if you look at, it's like a wrench. If you need to drive, let's say I want to fix that train behind me, right? It goes out. So what would I do? This is a fine example. I would hire a mechanic like he's a tool in order to fix that train, and he would get his tools and try to fix it. And I think the problem is, when we look at experiments, we look at things as tools. This is only something for a means to reach an end. It's devoid of all meaning, and I think this is the great crisis that we're really going through. And since nothing has no meaning in today's modern world, some people, they like to project, their own meaning onto stuff, since everything is a tool. And I think it's truly a real epidemic.
Yeah. So when did you make, and what prompted you to make the sort of turn from, I know you've practiced many forms of magic in the past, what was the thing that really drove home this classical magical paradigm that you now inhabit?
Interesting question. It really started when I started going through my earlier journals.
Yeah.
Some of them were so bad. I got my first journal from like when I started out as a neo-pagan. I kind of read that and I cringed a little bit. And like 32-year-old me would have went to younger me, like, man, what the hell are you doing? You know?
Yeah.
So I was looking through my evolution, and I realized it was devoid of like looking at actual nature, you know. And when I look at actual nature, and I'm not, when I say nature, you have to understand, I am not just talking about like the birds, the bees, the butterflies, the trees, and all this. Because the thing is, there, I think as I made myself go through Crowley and the Golden Dawn, and they kind of went into the metaphysical nature, but it was still so materialistic to in so many regards. Then I found Agrippa, and Agrippa really brought it home for me. And that's when I found the classical stuff like the PGM, although I really don't practice the PGM much anymore. But it was really the observation of nature, and I caught my narcissism. And I caught the all these cultures that were teaching narcissism, and and it really didn't help the problem. And I kind of, somebody brought up this idea in a comment on one of my videos, right? Let's say that you're a basketball team and you're losing, right? And the coach, and let's say you're 50 points behind, and your coach is telling you, go out there, we could still win. That's just not realistic. It, but rather, the coach needs to be saying, just go out there and play ball. And this is important because it's not always about feeling good. It's not always about feeling empowered. It's about sort of accepting the world as sort of as it is. I see the world as a living organism in a very animistic sense. And we're missing that, because when I was in my earlier neo-pagan days, I will never forget. I did this is a funny story. I think you're the first person I told this to. But I went to this neo-pagan ritual. I was already pretty deep in Agrippa and all that, and memorizing prayers and everything. So I said, okay, well, I'll do the quarter casting for the south. I memorized that. Now, I was the last one to do the quarter casting at the time, and it was so cool because I didn't feel any heart in any of the quarter castings at the other three quarters. And I'm not saying that I'm superior or they're inferior or any of that, but it was just emotionless. It felt like reading from paper, you know.
Mhm.
But I had my invocation in the back of my pocket. I did my invocation. I made the sign and I stomped my left foot down. And then it was so cool because half a second later there was thunder. And everybody's eyes got so big. Everybody's eyes. You should have seen. It was almost like I summoned Satan right there to a lot of. And the high priestess got so mad at me. I was actually applying probably a little more of the PGM practices with the signs and all that. They weren't really thelemic, but man, I'll never forget that. And after that, like half those people really didn't talk to me, you know. And I'm
Wow.
like, pardon me, but it was so funny because to me, like that's real results. That's real magic, you know.
Absolutely. I thought
And
you would have been applauded for that.
yeah, and I think once people touch the real thing, this is, you know, I realized that the magic I was being taught was more like, metaphysical self-help. It wasn't really magic.
That's
And
exactly what I was thinking today. That the Golden Dawn magic is. I mean, the book that I'm following or was following is called The Art of Self Transformation. And it really is a glorified self help book when I look at it now.
yeah, exactly. It's like when we look at brain surgery, let's say, there are more people being brain surgeons, right? And I see magic sort of in this light. And this is kind of what brought me to this is what drove it home. Is I don't want to be told I'm special. I don't want to be told that I'm always right. I don't want to be told I'm unique. I don't need to be told what I can and can't do. I don't need to be encouraged that way, and I'm sure it helps a lot of people, but it certainly didn't help me. But then, imagine if they wrote a self-help book on neuroscience. or, or
Yes.
or or wrote a self-help book on brain surgery or rocket science. Hey guys, I'm going to make you feel good. You put the fuel right here and then you run it through this pipe with this gas, and if you feel good, then this will go like an extra 500. It doesn't work like that. There's rules. I don't see magic as self-help. I mean, the closest thing to self-help is having a relationship with God, but even then, when you read the Bible and when you develop a personal relationship with God, and I've never really denied God. He's always been in my life, and I've always sort of spoken to him privately, you know, but the once you have that personally developed relationship, then you have something here that's that's not self-help because you realize your faults. So one of the things that you're taught is you're not perfect. You're a sinner, right from the get-go. And that's the one thing that I love. I want to be told I'm not perfect. I want to be told that I'm flawed because it's honest. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. That's the most honest thing is to say we can do better. And that's it. You know? I like that honesty. I don't want to be a part of a magical system that says you have worth, that you're perfect, that you're just unique. Yeah, of course, we're unique, but that doesn't mean that we're perfect.
Yeah.
And that's sort of my take. That's what drove it home.
Yeah, fantastic. So, when you talk about the lifestyle, what exactly do you mean? What is your lifestyle now?
Well, the first thing I would like to say is, as a lifestyle, I mean, this is just something that you do. It's kind of like we'll take something in your shoes, right? So you and even the viewer can relate. Now, let's say you have a non-practicing person, and and they're just interested in magic, a muggle, right?
Uh,
And then they come to you, and and they read some of your posts, they watch some of your videos, and they're like, "Wow, Saroth, that's some really good stuff. How do I get started?" Yeah, it feels good, but at the end of the day, you're helping that person, and and you say it's just something that you do. Sometimes, some days you may not feel like it, but you just do it. There's no incentive other than other than like I would have to say, then getting closer to the divine, and figuring out some of the secrets in this life, you know, and connecting with some of these entities, and especially the angels, and building a relationship with them and having dreams about them, uh doing divination with them, and learning something about the craft that I'm in, so even something externally like my job. Even when I was making, summoning angels and I was doing security, Michael taught me some cool stuff that I never thought about to help me with my job. So it's not really just self-help. This is stuff that's applicable. And I kind of deviated a little bit, but that's sort of the whole thing on it. So when people ask about it, that's how I would respond. Like with Renaissance magic, a lot of people think it's hard. The hardest parts are the preparation and gathering the knowledge. That's about it. But once you go into the actual ritual, there's no trance, there's no mindset. All you're doing is working on the purity. Now, when we go into the purity, what do we mean? It's no different than the Greek and Egyptian purity, abstaining from sex for a certain amount of days. A lot of times, fasting just requires a diet of bread and water. Um, and then you try to be a good person morally, not gossiping, not slandering, not judging, not stealing, stuff like that, and just being honest with yourself, and really trying to stay humbled with who you are, and saying, "Wow, I'm far from a perfect person, and I'm not ever going to come near, the perfection of God, but I will certainly do my best to do that." And that alone is an act of purity, because it's and that's what the Greeks called it too, is to ascend to the divine. It was like a stepping ladder, and each step was a new level of purity that you had to work past. Especially, this is really big in Neoplatonism. So, and the part of this requires going to church with grimoire magic. And it was kind of funny the other day because I'm actually going to a Catholic church now. I'm being confirmed in, and
Yeah.
I don't think it was yeah, it was a personal message I got from this one guy. I won't say his name, but he goes, "What are you doing on Sunday?" Well, just without thinking, I said, "I'm going to church at 11 p.m." He goes, "You go to church?" Yeah.
Yeah.
So the reaction is, and I'm not saying all occultists, but primarily, um, occultists are taught certain ways to do things, and church certainly isn't a part of it. I don't think in modern occultism purity is a part of it. So it's really, I guess we can summarize it by living a good Christian lifestyle first and foremost, or even a Muslim. Muslim culture, especially during the Renaissance, really helped fuel it. But
Yeah.
having a religion of purity, a closeness with God, is first and foremost. You wake up, you do your prayers, morning and nights, like the Jesus prayers, right? That you do.
Hmm. Yeah.
That. Yeah, and did you feel a difference from the Jesus prayers?
Oh, yeah. I'm wearing my rosary now.
Yeah, isn't it amazing?
I know.
Once
I
you
honestly, I never thought that, because one of the problems with me in magic was I was always so deeply skeptical. So I could never quite believe what I was doing was going to work. But something about your influence on me, perhaps, it's just, I've accepted it absolutely no problem at all. It's been easier for me to accept this way of thinking than all the other forms of magic that I've practiced for so long.
Yeah, like, don't you feel relieved?
I do. I absolutely
Yeah.
do. And since doing this, it seemed like a coincidence, but I've stopped smoking everything, if you know what I mean.
Wow.
And I'm really working on myself, and it just seems to be happening naturally.
Yeah, and you get it. And I want to go into the next step of living this lifestyle, and a lot of it is memorization of prayers. See, a lot of people, they carry on with daily practice and think that's really a task, right? It could be hard for some people, but memorizing these really long prayers, that is a real task.
Yeah, tell me about it.
hmm it's almost some of them are just as the English of them are just, they're as fluent as Shakespearean English. Some of them,
Yeah, it's
you
it's very
know.
awkward to remember because it just doesn't flow like modern English. It's like this that have strange words connecting sentences, and it is very hard to memorize, I have to say.
Yeah, but once you get it down and you memorize those and apply those to ritual, you feel it. You know what I mean? It's a lot like a movie in a sense, and this is the best thing that I can always come up with. I mean, imagine watching a movie and you see these actors just like reading their lines on paper, and they're not really memorized. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
wouldn't be the same if they didn't have their lines memorized. They couldn't get into that character, and that's what they're kind of
yeah.
doing, is getting into character. So when you're
That's a really
memorizing a
good
prayer,
point.
hmm yeah. So when you do those Jesus prayers, yeah, I mean, I this is so divine. It's not even just in character, but you're actually sincerely praying. It's not just empty lines on paper anymore.
No.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm thinking, it's through repetition. And what I do is I record them and then use my earbuds to listen to it on the train going to work, on breaks, when I'm going to bed at night, you know, playing over and over and over. And I even split some into like 2 or 3 parts. So it's like easier to remember, bite-sized chunks. And I find that's an aid because we remember lyrics from songs that we've heard, loads of times without effort.
Yeah, and it's totally worth it. I mean, the daily practice of memorizing complex prayers is equally as hard as, doing the LBRP, and that's the main thing, is the prayers are really purifying in a way too.
Yeah.
You know.
So, from a daily praxis standpoint, I take it you've done away with LBRPs and all the modern sort of occult practices.
Yeah, because to me with the LBRP, yeah, it may feel good temporarily throughout the day, but then that moment comes up to where you get really mad or really angry, or you get, kind of depressed, kind of sad, and which is natural. But if there's a good daily practice, I mean, it should make you wiser. It should make you more aware of stuff. And when we focus on our prayers and the words of those prayers, and when we do our morning prayers, our evening prayers, vespers, or when we pray before we eat, or pray to gain more knowledge and wisdom, I mean, this is a lifestyle. I mean, you don't do the LBRP before you eat, you
Yeah.
know? or you don't do the or you don't do the LBRP before you take on a subject matter. And even, this is a technology that goes all the way back to the Sumerians. When you read the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh's mother, she burned herbs and she prayed to the gods to protect Gilgamesh. I mean, there was no boundary between magic and religion. Even at some point in Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh prayed to the mountain to give him a beneficial dream, and to teach him something, and then he would have that dream. Then Enkidu would interpret that dream. you know,
Yeah.
Once again, that was his religion. That was his magic, his religion. And a
Yeah.
lot of people, they have a false dichotomy of magic and religion. When you go through these old texts, it was the same exact thing. The divorce didn't happen until much later in history. So once again, daily practice of prayer, meditation, contemplation, I would say reading holy texts, getting closer with God, um, getting closer with your holy guardian angel, um, going to church. I mean, that alone within itself is a daily practice, and I'm sure you've become more aware of it now.
Yeah. I'm thinking, did you experience a backlash, because you came from like your normal modern magic, Thelemic, Golden Dawn, Lodge, psychological magic, and then all of a sudden you're talking about going to church and obedience to God and stuff? Did you lose any subscribers? Did you get nasty comments? Did people, think you'd gone mad?
It's interesting because that's one thing I've always sort of prided myself on, and you know me, I'm the same person as I am on camera as I am off camera,
I'll
and
testify to that. Yes.
yeah, and I try to be pretty transparent, and yeah, I have had some backlash. I mean, the worst time that I've had no results ever in magic was when I did chaos magic. I thought, am I doing something wrong? What's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
So, but the time that I had the most results was when I was working with Agrippa on the road and using his correspondences from the 3 books of occult philosophy, and even working out of the book of Abramelin. So I saw the stark difference, and I tried to give chaos magic one more chance, but the results were nil, and the only response was I would ask other chaos magicians, and they would say results are subjective. How can they be subjective?
No,
You know?
it either worked or it didn't.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. It turned into this whole self-help thing. It can't subjectively work. I mean, we can take it as subjective, but like, let's say, for example, I'm going to focus on a job again. I want to get a job at a factory, and I do a specific spell or a ritual to get a job in a factory, right?
Mm-hmm.
And once again, I've worked in a factory before, so that's the only example I can think of at the moment. Either I'm going to get that job or I'm not. My family can look at me and tell me I got that job or I didn't, you know. Or if I want to be a changed person and I want to live a better life, there was a priest who said something ingenious. A changed person lives a changed life. And if you're a changed person, people will see that. If it's your goal to do a spell or do magic to be a changed person, if you see the difference, and if other people see the difference, there's no subjectivity in there. It, you know, you're objectively a changed person.
Yeah.
And uh, so I think that's my whole thing um, is there's a degeneracy of culture and metaphysics and all that, that have been occurring ever since, especially the spiritualist movement.
Yeah. You mean like the spirituals, like the Fox sisters and the table tapping and theosophy and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much. I mean that's just sort of my whole gist, and I think it's kind of like either you're gonna bake a cake or you're not. If you're gonna make magic to bake a cake next week and you don't end up baking it, you know, then I don't know. That's just my personal thought, but that's the practice, though. I mean, just living this life as a practice because there's so much discipline in it. It's really, there's really not much difference to living the life of an ancient Greek philosopher and living the life of a Christian. There's really not that
Yeah.
much of a difference. The aims are so similar, the disciplines are so similar.
Yeah, it's not that much of a leap from Neoplatonism to Christianity, and I think that's why the early Greeks had such an influence on early Christianity.
No, you can even tie it to Aristotelian thought or Aristotelian thought. As an example, Aristotle was very big about, a lot of Greek was about moderation and trying to be a better version of yourself and ascending. The Greeks loved this idea of transcendence, as did, I think they got this from the Assyrians, but transcendence was a big thing. I mean, I think the Cynics were heavily against it, but but overall, I mean, when we think back even to the pre-Socratics, to the Platonists, Middle Platonists, and even the Epicureans, it was focused around, and it was a moral philosophy, and I'm not afraid to say that there was a purpose behind it. So living this lifestyle, obviously there are certain precepts and maxims. I mean, you don't steal, you don't hurt your neighbor, you don't lie, you avoid slander, you seek wisdom, things like that. You memorize prayers, and I was meditating one day that really encapsulated this thought really well, right? And it occurred to me so strongly. And I thought about what is wisdom. And then I had this whole day to where I was reading St. Augustine and reading the philosophers on love and reading what Renaissance artists said on love. And I've came to the conclusion that, for example, wisdom isn't just this esoteric thought of transcendence. And once again, a changed person lives a changed life. So it's knowledge applied with love. Love of your man. That's what wisdom is.
Agape is the word, isn't it? Agape is the non-romantic love.
Yes, exactly. The love of God. And even Theophilos, that means a friend of God, which is the name that I took on. And I think it's really important to understand, though, the ramifications, because love applied with knowledge is wisdom, not just meditating in your back room, then later on you treat people like an asshole. That's not wisdom. Just because you can do the LBRP and get some knowledge from it and talk about it, that's not wisdom. And that's what a lot of these grimoires focus on, is wisdom. That's what a lot of philosophy focuses on is wisdom. That's what Christ himself focused on, was wisdom. That's what the Buddha focused on, was wisdom. It's the application of knowledge and love. And I think that should be a daily practice, because what good is hiding away. Okay, Saroth, let's take you for example, right? Let's say you're meditating, you want to become a better person, you want to be wiser, you want to be more knowledgeable and more loving. Okay, so but instead you just stay in your room and hide from the world. You're not going out, you're not giving to charity, you're not helping people, you're not doing all of this. So how can you test your wisdom if you're not putting yourself around fellow man?
Yeah, good point.
So that's the whole point of this magic, is to really test your wisdom, to test the strength and test the things that you've learned, is to see your flaws and fix your flaws. And that's what this grimoire magic is mainly about. It's about your job and about becoming a better person, and it's about the mystical experience. And the mystical experience came from the exoteric view of Christianity, and the esoteric was your actual grimoire practice.
Yeah, I wanted to get on to that because before I met you, my idea of grimoires were, oh, that's how you summon demons and make them find gold for you, or a lot of the games seem quite trivial and silly to me. Oh, this one, commands so many legions, and he can turn diamonds into coal and back again. So contact with spirits is a big part of grimoire magic, yes?
Yes, very much so. Well, even before we go into that, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. What are your thoughts on it now?
Well, like you say, I think it's a much deeper process of like almost submission. This was something I never got. I always thought that magic was almost a rebellion against gods, or setting ourselves up as gods in a kind of thelemic way.
Mm-hmm.
But and it puts a lot of pressure on you. You know, I think, oh God, I'm not a god yet. I don't feel like God at all. And I was really not feeling that much results from I kind of reached a plateau where I thought, wow, this is really working, and then shroomp, it just all went flat. So with this new infusion of energy, and I hope it's not a fad, you know, I really hope that I'm able to stick to this, but it feels a lot deeper, a lot simpler. The burden's not always on you. It's about opening yourself to that higher presence, whether it be your holy guardian angel or even just the lesser spirits, the Olympic spirits. So, I mean, I'm just at the beginning of the journey, so I can't give a
and look
huge...
at how much of an impact it's already had. You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
I've gotten a lot of new people who come from thelemic backgrounds and Golden Dawn backgrounds, and that's a part of the reason I guess why I wanted to talk about this is because, you know, we do have all these pressures, we do have all these stresses, we have nowhere to vent them. You know, some people treat magic like a fantasy and an escapism away from their daily stuff. For example, you know, you have a neo-pagan, and not that I have anything against neo-pagans, but, you know, let's take them as an example. You know, you have Cindy, she's a clerk at a store. You know, she has a boring job and she has 2 kids, right? You know, that's her life. You know, and she has a boyfriend she sees on the occasion on her days off. Okay, a pretty average mundane thing, but it's not there's no purpose. She feels like there's no purpose to it. So how do we fill in that gap? Well, let's just dress up like something out of World of Warcraft.
I was
And
just thinking role-playing
yeah,
games there.
wave around a wand, get a knife, cut into the air, and say Adonai, a Christian name, you know, doing LBRP, and and let's create this fantasy that's not boring. You know, and that's the one thing uh that I find here is that with grimoires you had to be virtuous. There was always something to strive for, and even till the end of your life you're not going to reach it, but it doesn't
Yeah,
mean that you don't try. And
yeah,
and yeah, you're absolutely right. With grimoires, people say there's no spirituality. Oh, there's a whole bunch of spirituality. When you look at these incorporeal beings, in order to even get in touch with them properly, I mean, you have to be at a certain vibration or purity, you know. And if you're just doing this and let's say you don't believe in God and you just recite the prayer, "Oh God, forgive me of my sins. Send me an angel down. I need this right now. Amen." You know, the thing is, it's not going to work. So people have to put themselves in a trance in grimoire magic because they aren't into it. You know, these entities are not stupid, and the ones who do think you're stupid, that you know, they take advantage of you. I mean, it's a highly unpopular opinion, but I guess I'll just come out and say it. You know, for example, let's look at Crowley. I think, and I even said it in the comment section earlier, I think Crowley was guided by an evil spirit because I think he was a bloody genius, but I don't think he had a lick of wisdom. And how do we know this? It's just by how he treated people, you know, treated people horribly. There's no wisdom in that. So, he's one of those complex characters, and I know that's an unpopular statement, but once again, a changed person lives a changed life. So,
yeah,
I think that the idea of grimoire magic is to really remain focused, as the philosophers would say, onto one thing, as the Christians would say, God and Jesus, you know, and as some people in other religions may say, the universe. But whatever the case is, it's not what's written in the grimoires that makes it spiritual. It's what's unwritten. And
yes.
yeah, but that's my take on grimoire spirituality.
Yeah. So let's move on to the beautiful book that I've just recently purchased. I had the what do you call it, the computer file thing, but I've now got the hardback, the Joseph Peterson. Beautiful little book it is, the Arbatel.
Yes.
Concerning the Magic of the Ancients, original source book of angel magic. What's your feelings on the Arbatel?
Well, even before I answer that, what are your feelings on it when you go through it?
I love it. I had I can't remember what you call those computer copies. Those
PDFs.
PDFs. Yeah, I had the PDF, and I fell in love with it. So I just had to spend some of my hard-earned money on the hardback copy, and I've just never had it out of my hand since I got it. It's just so different from any other book on magic I've ever read.
Yeah, there's actually there was a person we was working with, specifically going through the grimoire, and a lot of people they just buy it for the Olympic spirits, which is kind of naive, and actually kind of in your position. But this person is from Canada. They were a recovering drunk and heroin addict,
Oh, yeah. Well,
and it. Mm-hmm.
I was a heroin
But
addict, of course, as everyone knows.
yeah, and you know what? She started working out of that book. She set up just a little corner in her house with the Bible there. She would read the Bible and meditate on the Bible as it prescribed, and then she started doing stuff out of that book, like, memorizing stuff, and she started focusing on a singular thing she wanted to do in life and meditating on it. And and that was like the peak of her happiness. She got so much out of that. um it really did change her life. But after she got out of the practice, I mean, it was a travesty. I'm not going to say she relapsed, but
Yeah.
she, and but she didn't feel the same. She felt terrible. She was missing that feeling again, and she couldn't find that drive to open up the Arbatel again because something changed. There was an impurity or something.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing about the Arbatel is it lays out precepts and maxims that a lot of grimoires don't put in such a way. And it's a very Christian book. I mean, this is one of the few grimoires to openly say Jesus.
Yeah. Well, Jesus is all through it, and the first prayer which I've memorized. It's just a beautiful prayer.
How long did it take you to memorize it?
Well, I haven't quite memorized it all. I've got I've only had the copy for about 3 weeks. So I've got the first two verses absolutely down, but I still stick at places. So I wouldn't say I've got it fully memorized. But I'm reading the Elizabethan world picture as well, and I work so much, I don't have a lot of spare time, so I'm not going to be
Yeah.
too hard on myself.
Yeah, but doesn't when you read the Elizabethan world picture, doesn't that put the Arbatel in context?
That's exactly what it does. It puts all this stuff in context, which is helpful because it can seem very strange and kind of old-fashioned at first. Like the old me would have stayed a million miles away from this because I thought, well, modern must be best, because everything modern incorporates everything that's gone before it. So someone writing a book about magic must have, had the whole of tradition behind them, if you know what I mean.
Uh-huh. But once you actually start experiencing it rather than observing it, it's something totally different. It's
Well,
kind of like saying, I know 2 plus 2 is 4, but once, let's say you work somewhere and you have to know 2 plus 2 is 4. Somebody gives you a 10 with a meal that costs $6. You got to give $4. You've experienced the $4. If you give that person $3, they're going to be angry. you know.
yeah,
So, and that's what I mean is the experience. And with the Arbatel, it lays out the precepts of any grimoire really that the magician should be following. And you have to keep in mind it's incomplete too. I recently just
yeah,
posted up a comment about it because someone posted about it. And there's a lot of new age stuff with it. and I don't agree with the New Age ideology. Once again, too much self-help. There's no depth. It's the same thing. I mean, I could write pretty much a New Age book, and just I could get 200 blank pages, and just on the front page is, visualize and be happy. That's it. And I've
Yeah.
written down the whole book. But the idea of the Arbatel is different. The Arbatel isn't just saying ritual purity, you know. It's saying you got to be a decent person to do this. You can't trick the angels. You can't trick God. You can't trick these beings. So it's important to state that is a book of prayer more than an actual ceremony. All you need is the seal. You don't need any. You don't need any wands. You don't need any table of practices or any of that. And and I kind of treat sometimes what I'll do, buddy, is I'll put the seals under my pillow. I'll say the prayer. There's 4 prayers in there, but I'll say the prayer and I'll stick it under my pillow, and I will let that Olympic spirit give me a dream, and not just in the sense of me and Taliesin experience, but working on purity outside of the home, not just for the sake of ritual, but because you actually feel it. And once you actually get into that practice, these Olympic spirits, they will come to you. They will teach you things in your dreams.
Yeah.
I found out the same thing with philosophers. There was Pythagoras. He came to my dream and he showed me a working table to create. I woke up immediately. I wrote it down. My holy guardian angel led me um, to Pythagoras, and now I have my own working table.
Wow.
Dreams are a powerful thing.
I
Yeah,
hadn't heard that one. Yeah. So
yeah,
here we've got like the invocation of Spirit, O God Almighty and Eternal, you have established all of creation for your praise and honor. So it goes on and says, I beg you to send the Spirit, and then you name the Spirit. So you would say that prayer, you would draw the sigil, put it under your pillow. Obviously, you'd need to do it on the right day of the week so that it was under
yeah.
your pillow
Right day and
for,
right hour.
yeah. But I mean, it's always the first hour of the day of that spirit, isn't it?
Hmm. Yeah.
So, I mean, you could do this, the seal the night before.
Hmm. I
So,
actually have them stocked up. They're on lambskin right now, but I'm actually going to be getting the medals,
yeah,
the
this
proper
is something
medals.
nice. Yeah, I mean, I've done them on paper, and it's seemed to work, not too bad, but obviously metal would be better.
Yeah, because of the sympathetic planetary correspondences. And that's the thing. I always think it's important to read those books I mentioned earlier. And while you're reading those books, it's really good to memorize those prayers out of the Arbatel and to go to church. And I'm going to make a video about Christianity and all this on my channel. I think here over the next week, because that's a tough pill for people to swallow. you know.
Yeah, yeah,
And I'm not trying to preach or anything. This is just kind of the magic, and you can't really fake this magic. You can't take shortcuts in it.
yeah. I kind
And
of laugh when I remember when I spoke to you at first. It really was. At first, I was like, I wanted to do the magic, but I didn't really want the church part of it. And I was like, well, couldn't I just kind of not fake? Well, yeah, I wanted to kind of fake it in a way, didn't I?
mhm,
But
yeah.
you can't. You can't.
Oh yeah, I mean you can't fake this. I mean, and once you actually experience it, and you know, it's a beautiful thing. It's like it makes you look back and like, man, there's actually something here. This isn't just some old juju, you
No,
know. It's
there is
outdated.
definitely there's definitely a presence of some kind that has entered my life recently that just simply wasn't there before.
Yeah, and that's all you got to do is, like the Orthodox members, they'll actually stand up when they pray. So, and like you could do sort of what like my friend did, like I mentioned earlier, set up a small corner in your house. You don't need any fancy altars, right? You can get stones and stuff on there, but keep a Bible there, keep all of your planetary seals there, and just read the Arbatel like an aphorism and just meditate on it, just one a day,
Yeah.
and that's it. And you'll get so much out of that, and it's like, man, I never realized that. Like you feel an internalized change. I think out of all the grimoires, I think my first one was the Book of Abramelin, but the second one was the Arbatel of Magic that changed my life, really. And
Yeah.
even though it's not a grimoire, Agrippa changed my life. Those are the three main books that really
Yeah.
changed.
So we're going to have to wrap up kind of soon, not too soon, but the next half an hour or something. So to anyone out there who's maybe like me, tried a few different magic modalities, shall we say? You've got your books, you've got your good works. Is there anything else, practical advice you could give people who want to get started on this path?
Well, it's actually really easy. You know this as well as I do. I mean, it's not that hard to really just get up and pray. And another thing you could do is, find some books related to that era, but don't, but stay singular focused too. That's really important. And I think a lot of this would be covered in my 15 mistakes that I made as a beginning occultist.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I think that's a big one. For example, a couple practical things that'll help you on your journey. Always check your sources. And if a source says it's old, double check, you
Yeah.
know, because a lot of like, for example, the what's their name? Oh yeah, Amorc. They'll say that they're an old order when they're really not,
Yeah.
and then
They're
they believe they have this history going all the way back to Egypt.
yeah, they're a Rosicrucian kind of order, are they?
hmm Yeah, the Rosicrucians, yeah, Amark, yeah. So I think it's really important not to just check your sources and, you know, but it's just going to sound really simple, but, pray for wisdom and understanding. It sounds silly, like at the beginning, why the hell am I praying for knowledge? But then there's always going to be that one thing that just pops up. It's like, boom. It's like, oh, wow. I was just going to ask about that. I get
Uh,
it. You know, it, whether it has to do with your job, whether it has to do with something you can work on yourself, whatever the case may be. There's and that's the whole thing about this is kind of submission is to letting go of control, and that's so scary to do because we feel vulnerable, and and that's another practical advice. It's okay to feel a little vulnerable, but it actually makes you stronger. And that's okay. That's a good thing. I mean, to me, it's a true test of will, you know? It's
yeah.
a, it's a, it, I mean, think about it. I mean, when people become vulnerable, think of how much trust that you have to sacrifice because it's not you putting trust in yourself.
Yeah. It does. It's. I was watching. For some reason, I was watching. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. Somebody called Orly Stewart. She's
hmm
quite left-hand path, but she makes some sense. She was talking about that magic does tend to attract people who have had drug and alcohol problems because they feel like they're not in control and they need to feel a kind of control, and also
hmm
people who have got like problems with their like looks or body image because a lot of it's like astral imagining yourself, and in the astral you can look so she was kind of underlining this without knowing it. I think she underlined this role-playing fantasy aspect to it, escapism
Yeah,
really.
yeah, exactly. And that's going to happen a lot. I mean, how, and that's one thing that I think that really brought me down to reality is that it's okay that we all have boring lives. It really is, you know. And even the most extravagant people that we can think of, our favorite celebrities, our favorite historical people, our favorite musicians, at the end of the day, they also have boring lives. Some of them may not show it, but there's this whole thing wrapped around the idea of something being boring and how
Yeah.
boring it has no meaning. Well, that's not true at all. I mean, look at a mother who has 2 or 3 kids, a single mother. All she does is work, sleep, eat. She may have the occasional boyfriend, or she just may be single. But
Yeah.
she has to raise those kids, and kids, let's be honest, they're far from boring.
Yeah.
She may
Exactly.
perceive those as boring because it's her daily life, but it's important to acknowledge that life is boring. And it kind of goes back to who John Mellencamp is.
He's a singer, isn't he? An American sort of country singer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in the song Jack and Diane, he says something that really strikes home that I think more people should think about. He goes, "Oh yeah, life goes on long after the thrill of living is gone."
Yeah, I
And
know
it's
that song.
true. It's
Hmm.
so true. I mean, after I first time I ever heard that song, I was 13. Even then, I think I had kind of a deep mind. I was still a moron to some extent, but I had a deep mind. But
Yeah,
I paused that song on my CD. I'm like, wow. Oh yeah, life goes on long after the thrill of living is gone. Just that line, it's so deep. And I
yeah,
think that when we embrace this simplicity in our lives, it's okay if something is boring. It's okay if we aren't going to amount to anything job wise. I think that a lot of people they place their value on their job, that on how
yeah.
much money that they make, and they
Hmm.
place their value in these earthly things. And not that we shouldn't focus on earthly things, but I don't think it should hold measurement to our true character. Or just because
Yeah.
we're bored, we're not having a whole lot of fun. But it's okay. We have priorities. We have to live. I mean, if you want to talk about fun, go to some of these rock stars. They had a blast doing cocaine, but look at them now.
Well, exactly. Most of them are dead, and I think
Exactly.
that this was a terrible influence on me as a youth. I read Jim Morrison's biography and the Rolling Stones, and I thought for life to have any kind of meaning, you had to be in a band, which I was. You had to take loads of drugs. The sort of live fast, die young attitude, and all it got me was I didn't die. I just wasted 25 years of my life,
Oh yeah,
and
you
it's
may have had the blast of your life, the blast of a lifetime, but then you end up like with nothing at the end, right?
oh, I was reduced to absolute poverty, and oh, really low. And I lost a lot of friends. Death and suicide, and it ended in a very very dark way. And I could never have foreseen that when I started. And there was that. I'm not going to blame Crowley or anyone, but his lifestyle, because he was so wealthy and he could jet around the world, not jet around the world, but move around the world, travel. A lot of young occultists, I think, fasten on to Crowley to think,
Hmm.
wow, he was a rock star.
Yeah, and he was pretty much. You could say it that way. And this
Yeah,
is one thing about Christianity that I love from the beginning. Even Judaism, right? I mean, let's face it. I mean, although man was created beautiful in his soul like God wanted, hence why man was created in the image of God, not really in an anthropomorphic sense, but with his soul. Like his soul could be above angels, and yet he in his lower soul, he could be worse than a beast, lower than a beast.
yeah,
And man was put here partially to work with his hands, you know, to have a simple life, to till the ground, to keep societies functioning, to serve a role, and to help each other. And I think it's some of that thought that says, okay, I can't amount to anything because I'm comparing myself to this person, this person, this person, and this person. It's not what role can I do to help or what is the purpose of me helping, you know?
yeah, yeah,
Like, I'm not going to lie, motherhood And I applaud all the mothers and all the fathers, because out of all the jobs in this world, that is the most prominent job anyone could have, because you are raising your posterity, you're testing your morals, you're testing your character, and you're helping change a human being for their whole life. And
I absolutely agree.
There was this one woman, she wanted to get into grimoire magic, and I told her, and she said she had like 3 or 4 kids, and I told her that, yeah, I mean, you can do this, I mean, but remember, magic isn't this fantasy. Magic, it has nothing to do with the job that you work. I mean, yeah, it's a vocation. Like, there's some sort of vocation you can strive for, some sort of calling, some sort of job, and I'm not going to deter you from that. I think you should. But I said the part of magic is taking the job, taking your calling to magic, or taking your calling that God gives you or whatever, and applying it with magic. If you, for example, with you being a mother, one of your kids could be president. Your decisions affect them. I mean, this isn't just a person who's asking for a new boyfriend or a new girlfriend. This is you putting your food on the plate. And I told her that if there's plenty of magic out there, and I recommended to her the Arbatel of Magic. I told her, memorize the prayers, just go to church, enjoy the experience, be around people in church, talk to them, shake their hand, hug them. It's about community. And that's one thing that I found is, and that I've personally rediscovered about church, is that it's about community. Yeah, there's always going to be those negative people that just go there for their bread and wine, and those people go back to being negative nillies. That's okay. I mean, if they want to live that way, that's fine. But when you actually go there and get to know people, it's a reminder that you have a role, once again, that's the exoteric being a reflection of the esoteric.
Yeah.
So the exoteric puts up limitations on how to do things the right way for us, while the esoteric is about us striving in the exoteric. So,
yeah.
I guess
The Arbatel is very strong on the magus being a part of a community and contributing it. It's always going on about and for the good of all, and love your neighbor. Those very basic things where I think other grimoires maybe say you're better to isolate yourself, be a hermit. Arbatel is very different in that way, I think.
Well, actually, it does say be a hermit, but it doesn't say hate thy neighbor. At some point in there, it says it's okay to, it actually says to have very few friends, which is good advice, really.
It does say shun the multitudes, right enough.
Yeah, exactly. Because you have to focus on your work, your great work, your magnum opus. That's really important. So I think at the end of the day that, I think we had a pretty good discussion here on the point of this Renaissance magic and why it's important how you live the lifestyle. And I know that you wanted to do this, and I certainly hope that you got something out of it with your year and a half practice coming up, because it is simple. It's simple but hard in the sense of preparation.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And I'd just like to say, all the people that have promised that the video that we're going to do, that we did do with you and Taliesin, it was just too hard to edit at 4 hours. We couldn't do it, so we're going to redo it again on Friday, and it could be another 4 hours, but we're gonna do it as if it was a live stream, so it won't require any editing. So people, you will get this wonderful talk that we're going to do, and we're going to cover these subjects in far greater depth, and that'll be recorded on Friday, and I'll get it out in a couple of days after that. So wait no longer, people.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a good time.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, Theophilus, I think we've covered it, and that's about an hour and a half, so that's perfect. I can't wait to upload it. It's the first time I've ever recorded and uploaded from Skype, so I hope it all goes well. So I will bid everyone a fond good night for now, and thank you very much, Theophilus, Logos of Ophiel, and talk soon.
Yep, I was glad to be on here. 18 and God bless.
18, God bless.